The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Seated at the defense table was Victor Langston, a billionaire CEO, infamous for his arrogance and complete disregard for the law. Langston leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. Because in his mind, this wasn't a real trial. This was just another nuisance lawsuit from someone trying to shake him down for money. And the attorney standing across from him? A joke. Across the room, Ava Sinclair adjusted the sleeves of her blazer, her expression unreadable. She was young, too young in Langston's eyes. A woman. And to him, that meant she was no threat. His high-priced legal team had already dismissed her in their minds. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated her. As the trial began, the CEO's lead attorney stood with a smirk. "Your Honor, my client, a highly respected businessman, has been accused of wrongdoing without a shred of legitimate evidence. This entire lawsuit is nothing but an attempt to tarnish his reputation." Langston chuckled, shaking his head. Ava didn't react. She simply waited. Then, when it was her turn, she stood up. "Your Honor," she said smoothly, "the defense claims there is no evidence. Today I intend to prove that not only is there evidence, but it is damning." She turned to face Langston directly. "And by the time I'm done, Mr. Langston will realize that no amount of money can save him." The courtroom froze. Langston's smile wavered. Because for the first time, he felt something he hadn't expected. Ava Sinclair wasn't here to play games. She was here to win. Victor Langston's smug smirk faded as Ava Sinclair stepped toward the judge's bench. She carried a thin, leather-bound folder. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. But inside it was the kind of evidence that could ruin a man like him. She placed it on the table. "Your Honor, the defense claims there is no evidence tying Mr. Langston to corporate fraud." She flipped open the folder. "But that's about to change." Langston's attorney rolled his eyes. "This is nothing more than theatrics," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ms. Sinclair is wasting the court's time with baseless accusations." Ava didn't react. Instead, she lifted a single sheet of paper from the folder. "This," she said, holding it up for the jury to see, "is a signed internal memo from Mr. Langston himself. In this memo, dated 6 months ago, he explicitly instructs his financial team to alter revenue reports before presenting them to investors." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Langston stiffened. His attorney quickly jumped up. "Objection. There's no proof this document is authentic." Ava's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Actually," she said, "this document has already been forensically verified by a handwriting expert and a digital security analyst." She turned toward the jury. "It's real." A low murmur spread across the courtroom. Langston leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "I never wrote that." Ava met his gaze, completely unfazed. "That's interesting," she mused, pulling out a second document. "Because here's an email chain between you and your CFO, discussing how to restructure financial data in a way that would satisfy investors without technically breaking the law." She turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, these emails directly contradict Mr. Langston's sworn testimony. He has perjured himself." Langston's fingers curled into fists. His lawyer, for the first time, looked genuinely worried. Because they weren't just losing. They were cornered. And the young attorney they had mocked? She was about to end them. A visible shift rippled through the courtroom. The jury, once indifferent, now leaned in. The spectators, some of whom had likely walked in believing Victor Langston was untouchable, were now watching him squirm. And Ava Sinclair? She was just getting started. Langston's attorney shot up from his seat, his face tight with frustration. "Your Honor, this is a deliberate attempt to smear my client's reputation. These documents don't prove criminal intent, just a misunderstanding in financial reporting." Ava turned, calmly flipping a page in her folder. "Oh? Then I suppose you'll want to explain this." She lifted another piece of paper. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a whistleblower affidavit from a former Langston Industries accountant. This sworn statement details explicit instructions given by Mr. Langston to adjust financial figures before investor meetings. She paused, letting the words settle. This witness claims he was pressured to comply or risk being fired. Judge Calloway, who had remained mostly neutral up to this point, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Ms. Sinclair," he said, "do you have this whistleblower available for testimony?" Ava smiled. "Actually, Your Honor, we do." The doors to the courtroom opened and a man in a suit walked in, his expression tense but determined. The courtroom stirred. Victor Langston's face drained of color. The whistleblower, his former employee, the man who knew everything. Ava turned to the jury. "Mr. Langston has spent this entire trial mocking this case. He's acted as though he's untouchable, as though the law doesn't apply to men like him." She gestured toward the witness stand. But today, the truth speaks for itself. Langston gripped the edge of the table. For the first time, he wasn't smirking. Victor Langston wasn't smiling anymore. As his former employee walked toward the witness stand, a ripple of unease spread through the courtroom. Langston's hands clenched into fists. His entire empire had been built on power, intimidation, and control. But right now, he was losing control. The judge gestured toward the new witness. "State your name for the court." The man cleared his throat. "My name is Eric Daly. I worked for Langston Industries for 6 years as a senior accountant." Ava Sinclair stepped forward, calm and precise. "Mr. Daly," she said, "can you tell us why you decided to come forward?" Daly hesitated for just a moment, then looked Victor Langston dead in the eye. "Because I spent years covering up fraudulent financial activity." A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Langston's lawyer shot up. "Objection. This is speculative and unproven." Ava didn't even blink. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution has submitted internal email exchanges between Mr. Daly and Mr. Langston, emails where he was instructed to manipulate financial reports." She turned back to the jury. "We have paper trails, we have witness testimony, and we have a pattern of fraudulent behavior that spans years." Langston shot up from his seat, rage boiling over. "This is a damn witch hunt," he barked. "I built this company from the ground up. Do you think some nobody accountant and a second-rate attorney can take me down?" The courtroom fell silent. Ava tilted her head. Then she turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice unwavering, "you just heard the real Victor Langston." She paused, letting the weight of his outburst sink in. "A man who believes he's above the law." Langston gritted his teeth, because in that moment he knew he had lost. The courtroom wasn't on Victor Langston's side anymore. He could feel it. The jury, once neutral, now looked at him with disgust. The reporters in the gallery were already scribbling headlines about his meltdown. And Judge Calloway? He was done playing games. Judge Calloway removed his glasses and set them down carefully. His stare locked onto Langston, unreadable, but firm. "Mr. Langston," he said, his voice like steel, "you have shown nothing but contempt for this court, this trial, and the rule of law." Langston tensed. Ava Sinclair sat poised, calm, victorious. The judge turned to the jury. "After reviewing the overwhelming evidence presented, I find that Mr. Langston and his company are guilty of fraud, financial misconduct, and investor deception." Langston's fingers dug into the table, but it got worse. "As such, I am ordering Langston Industries to pay $150 million in damages to be distributed among the affected investors." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Langston's jaw dropped. $150 million? He blurted out. "You can't do that." Judge Calloway barely glanced at him. "I just did." Ava stood, composed as ever. "Your Honor," she said, "we also request that the court refer Mr. Langston to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. Given the perjury, falsified documents, and obstruction of justice, we believe—" Langston's lawyer shot up. "Objection!" Judge Calloway didn't even look at him. "Overruled." He turned back to Langston, his expression unreadable. "This court is referring you to federal authorities for further investigation." Langston gripped the table. His entire empire was crashing down around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. For the first time, the powerful CEO who thought he was untouchable was now just another fraudster facing consequences. And across from him, Ava Sinclair watched calmly. Because she had just won the biggest case of her career. The courtroom was electric. The whispers had turned into a wave of stunned conversation. Journalists scrambled to capture every detail. And Victor Langston? He sat motionless, stunned, defeated. Judge Calloway banged his gavel. "This court is adjourned." The sound echoed like a death sentence for Langston. As people rose from their seats, Ava Sinclair remained composed. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She had let the truth do the work. Meanwhile, Langston's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently in his ear. "We'll file an appeal," he muttered. "We can try to—" Langston snapped. "Shut up." The lawyer went silent, because even he knew this wasn't fixable. Langston stood slowly. His expensive suit, once a symbol of power, felt like a prison jumpsuit. As he turned toward the courtroom doors, the reporters pounced. "Mr. Langston, what do you have to say about today's ruling? Will Langston Industries survive this scandal? Do you regret underestimating Ms. Sinclair?" Langston ignored them all. But then, he heard her voice. Ava Sinclair stood near the judge's bench gathering her papers. She didn't look at Langston when she spoke, but her words cut like a blade. "You should have taken this seriously," she said, calm and steady. Langston's face darkened, because in that moment he realized something far worse than losing money. He had lost his reputation, and Ava Sinclair was just getting started.